Entering the final phase of the offseason program, the Seahawks kicked off OTAs today at the VMAC. What will we be watching on offense and defense over the next several weeks leading up to training camp? We'll be breaking it all down in our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in nearby Bremerton, Washington, or across the country in Providence, Rhode Island. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks kicking off OTAs today, the first of 10 organized team activities leading up to mandatory minicamp and eventually training camp. It's the final stage of the offseason program. Rob and I will be dishing out what we are going to be watching here the next few weeks as the Seahawks continue to move towards the start of the 2024 season. Plus, we'll continue our undrafted free agents with two more players' deep dives on strengths, weaknesses, where they fit on the depth chart. It's an exciting episode brought your way by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The Seahawks kicking off OTAs this afternoon, the first of 10 organized team activities. First time they've done this under new coach Mike Macdonald. There's a lot of questions out there from fans wondering what things are going to look like with this new coaching staff. And obviously, Rob, this time of year, guys are still playing with just a jersey and shorts and a helmet on. They're not playing real football. Contact is prohibited. So there's a lot of limitations in terms of what you can evaluate. And yet, these are incredibly valuable practices, particularly when you have a new coaching staff, because there's all the mental things that players need to adjust to with new playbooks, with a number of new players coming in. And that really leads into me, the first thing that I'm going to be watching on offense. I know you and I talked about this before the show, and some fans might say, well, Geno Smith's already been declared the undisputed starter, and that is true. John Schneider and Mike Macdonald have both done that multiple times. Geno Smith is the starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks, but I do think this is a unique situation, Rob, in the sense that Geno Smith is also learning Ryan Grubb's offense. It isn't just newcomer Sam Howell. And so while I think if Geno Smith was in the same offense that he'd been in the last couple of years, that you might see more of a 50-50 workload, I don't know that Seattle can afford to do that, because they got to get Geno Smith where he is able to master Ryan Grubb's offense. And I know they didn't trade for Sam Howell for him to stand on the sideline 85% of the time in these practices, but at the same time, there's got to be a balancing act, because Geno Smith's going to be the one that you're going to be counting on to win games for you on Sundays.
Well, and not only that, but as you described, even as you're just kind of starting the show here, and I think it's the perfect way to start, is that, again, Geno Smith has to learn this offense. And so to me, this is one of the real reasons why the Seahawks only have two quarterbacks on their roster at this point. It is going to be divvied up between Geno Smith and Sam Howell, both, of course, who have already started in the NFL. We're so used to seeing the Seahawks have these third or sometimes cases of even fourth quarterbacks, and let's be realistic, they were never going to make the roster. So what's the point? Why not just divvy up the actual snaps between the presumptive starter and Geno Smith and the young quarterback that you just traded for in Sam Howell, and see what you actually have here? Don't try to divvy them up between 2, 3, 4 players and nobody actually gets meaningful snaps. I think that you have to make the strong argument that Geno Smith is going to be getting 50 to 60 to perhaps even 70% of the snaps, but the Seahawks also have to evaluate what Sam Howell is. And as you said, Corbin, today is day one of the OTAs. Members of the media were not allowed into these practices. So I was basically kind of relying on, what I've been able to hear about some of the mini camps and what the Seahawks have already seen from Sam Howell. And they have been very impressed by his accuracy, his arm strength, and just his ability to kind of rally the troops and be a leader. That's what you're expecting at the quarterback position. But as you said, I really think that this comes down to what can the Seahawks expect from Geno Smith? How does he fit in Ryan Grubb's offense? Today is literally day one of the practices, not OTAs. That's what everybody calls them, but these are practices. First time the Seahawks are able to go 11 versus 11 and see how Geno Smith is going to be able to fit in Ryan Grubb's offense.
Yeah, that's really the big key here. It's not like Geno Smith has had a bunch of 11 on 11 reps. He's had none to this point. This is the first time. Granted, they could have done 11 on 11 stuff if they wanted to, offense versus offense, but there's literally no value to that. You might as well just do a walkthrough with no defense. And now you finally will get a defense on the other side. They can't do what they would normally do in a football game, but still, I'm with you. I think 65% is probably the cutoff here, that Geno Smith's got to get that many reps because you need him to have this offense down. You still want to get a look at Sam Howell, 35% still solid. It's a good reason not to have another quarterback on the roster right now, so he gets everything else, and you can begin that evaluation process. Regardless of who is under center, the other big question mark, and we're not going to get to see these guys mashing defensive linemen until early in training camp when the pads come on. So there's a big missing component here in the evaluation process, but this is when we start to see who's going to be the early leaders in the pack at not one, not two, but three potential competitions in the interior offensive line, both guard positions as well as center. From what I have been told, Olu Oluwatimi is going to be the first starter out of the gate for the Seahawks, but Nick Harris is going to get his opportunities. This is not simply Oluwatimi's job. Nick Harris is going to get his opportunities, so you're looking at a two-horse race there. Laken Tomlinson, maybe Satawa Lumea, pushing him as well, a sixth rounder with a lot of experience. And then the most intriguing one on the right side at right guard, Anthony Bradford, Christian Haynes, and maybe Tremaine Ankrum as well in the mix there. So you could have as many as 7 or 8 players that are vying for 3 starting positions. Right now, the mental aspect of the game, picking up the new offense, picking up the fundamentals that Scott Huff, the new coach, is pushing. That is what these guys have got to show they can do. And if you are not able to get off to a quick start with this new offense, whether you're a returning player or a rookie, it doesn't matter. That is going to be a bad start for you in wide open competitions.
Yeah, and so it's exactly like we just talked about the quarterback position. Of course, because he's the incumbent, Geno Smith has the advantage. And so you can make the same argument the right guard position with Anthony Bradford. He is the former starter a year ago, and so he is the incumbent as well. But Christian Haynes, we have all kind of just lavish praise on the Seahawks for recognizing that Christian Haynes might fall to them at number 81 overall. Of course, he did so. Is he actually going to be able to start for the Seahawks this year? Is it going to be at right guard, or is he already shown enough flexibility to be able to maybe transition to that left guard position, the position that he played as a true freshman all those years ago back at UConn? Or is the Seahawks going to ask Anthony Bradford to show off his versatility? Olu Oluwatimi has also shown a little bit of versatility during the mini camps. He took some snaps at the guard positions as well. So again, I think that the favorites is going to be the free agent Lakeland Tomlinson at left guard, then Oluwatimi at center, and then again Bradford at the right guard positions. But this is going to be your first opportunity to really see all of those players really be able to compete. And again, I think this is going to be fascinating just to see where Anthony Bradford, what kind of shape he's in. For one, is he playing exclusively at the right guard position? To me, that is going to be one of the biggest question marks. And similar to the conversation that we just had before at the quarterback position, is it going to be 2 out of every 3 snaps that Oluwatimi is going to be your starting center? How often is Nick Harris going to get his opportunities? Is it going to be 1 out of every 3 literally snaps, or is it going to be significantly less than that? To me, that is where my eyes are going to be. I understand everybody's going to be focusing on the quarterbacks and the skill position talent, but my focus is going to be on the offensive line.
And I'm curious if it's going to be similar to what we've seen in the past. I know it was Pete Carroll's staff, and there's going to be things that are done differently, but will you see Scott Huff have one day where Oluwatimi and Bradford are with the ones, and then the next day it's Nick Harris and Christian Haynes, and then do some mixing and matching with those guys, where it ends up being kind of like a 50-50 split, but it varies by day who's going to get the bulk of those snaps with the first team. So that is something I'm curious about. And of course, there's going to be the tight end, running back, and receiver group. Is there going to be an unsung player that is going to emerge? Because I'm saying this because this is where Jake Bobo started his run last year towards making the football team. He had a very impressive OTAs. We've certainly seen some players, Phil Bates is one that comes to mind, that had good OTAs, could never make the roster. But there are plenty of examples of guys at the skill positions who kind of came out of nowhere, and they used these OTAs to get a strong first impression and really put their name on the radar to make the team. So whether it's a Jack Westover at tight end, it could be an offensive lineman like a Garrett Greenfield. Maybe you're looking at the backfield at George Halani, but there are players that these are very important practices just to put your foot forward positively and say, hey, I'm here to win a roster spot. Pay attention to me. And I think that is something to keep an eye on anytime you're talking about OTAs, whether it's a new coaching staff or an old coaching staff.
Yeah, no question about it. For me, you mentioned wide receiver, running back. I'll jump in with tight end. A.J. Barner, the rookie from Michigan, just knowing how good of a blocker he is, how important that I expect that he will be for Jay Harbaugh, Seattle's special teams coach, and previously, of course, was at Michigan. I'm curious to see how many snaps that A.J. Barner gets at that tight end position, or if it really is Noah Fant, obviously, as the starter, but then Pharaoh Brown being the number 2, or does A.J. Barner have an opportunity to kind of squeeze his way into more reps as Seattle's number 2 tight end?
When we come back, we're going to continue our preview of Seahawks OTAs, going to the defensive side of the football, what Rob and I are going to be watching closely over the next few weeks leading up to mandatory minicamp, and of course, the start of training camp. Don't go away. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Fan Playoff Time. We're getting into the conference finals now. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Will Connor McDavid score at least 2 goals for the Oilers in Game 7 against the Canucks? Will speedy youngster Ellie De La Cruz steal another base for the Reds as he pursues history? Will Anthony Edwards stay hot and score at least 20 points in Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals against the Mavericks? You can bet on all of this on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s that are tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Continuing our 2024 OTAs preview. For those of you that don't know what OTAs stands for, organized team activities, or you could just call them glorified voluntary practices, because that's really what they are. Every NFL team can have up to 10 of them in the final phase, the third and final phase of the offseason program. They are especially critical for the Seahawks because they have a new coaching staff. And that's not just Mike McDonald. Everybody but Carl Scott is a newcomer. You've got brand new schemes in all 3 phases of the game. So these are critical practices for the veterans as well as the incoming rookies and second and third year players for that matter. Rob, looking at the defensive side of the football, we just talked about the quarterbacks, the offensive line, skill position depth. On defense, what's the first thing that comes to mind that you're going to be watching here over the next couple of weeks in these 10 OTA sessions?
Where's Draymond Jones? I mean, that to me is as simple as I can put it. Fact that, of course, most of his success in the Denver Broncos and early on with the Seahawks was inside of the defensive tackle position, but he's 6'2.5", 280 pounds, Corbin. At least that's what he was a year ago. Has he dropped weight? We talked so much over the offseason about Seattle's inability to play any type of run containment on the outside. He has the size, he has the strength. All of our speculation that Seattle might be moving Draymond Jones outside. It's not just us. I mean, literally his trainer on social media suggested that Draymond Jones is preparing to play more on the outside. Is that actually coming to fruition we are going to find that out. To me, that is one of the biggest storylines of the entire OTA. And as we get closer to training camp, this entire process, Corbin, is that we know that the Seahawks have invested significantly on the interior. Is Draymond Jones the big splashy addition that they have to the exterior to be able to play on the outside, to be able to kind of mitigate should there be any type of a drop off from say a Boye Mafe, or if Uchenna Nwosu is not he's not the exact same player, as dominant of a player as he was prior to going down with the injury a year ago. To me, that is the biggest storyline on the defensive side of the ball, is exactly where does Draymond Jones fit in, and can he live up to the huge contract that he signed a year ago?
This is all about establishing a pecking order, because when you have as much depth and talent as the Seahawks now have on their defensive line, there's going to be some guys that are going to be moving around, especially in this new scheme. And Draymond Jones is naturally the one that we're going to discuss. I'm very curious to see where they're going to be playing him at. How much is he going to be inside? I expect they're still going to use him some in there, particularly on 3rd and long situations with his athleticism. Let him get after the quarterback and push the pocket. But what I really want to see is what dominoes fall if he is going to be playing more on the outside. I don't think Uchenna Nwosu and Boye Mafe have anything to worry about, with the fact both those guys have had near double-digit sack seasons the last 2 years. Mafe's going to his 3rd year, could be much better than last year. Nwosu, we saw how bad they looked without him a year ago. This really falls down to the other two defensive ends, your edge rushers, outside linebackers, whatever you want to term them as in this scheme. Derek Hall and Darrell Taylor. This is the time to rise to the challenge, because if you don't, Draymond Jones, he's going to take reps from you, and it's going to be a 3-headed monster. The other two guys, they're just going to get whatever the scrap heap has left over for them. So that's something I'm looking forward to seeing, where Byron Murphy II fits into this rotation. Cameron Young and Mike Morris now coming back healthy this year. I just want to see how that depth gets put together. How does this rotation start to come together? Because this is the time of year you're going to start to see that, and then it's really going to be solidified once the pads come on in training camp. Going to the second level of the defense, I just want to see who is going to emerge as the replacement for Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks. I know from free agency standpoint, Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dodson are already penciled in as the starters, but I'm going to say this just from some things that I have heard under the radar, behind the scenes the last couple of weeks. I think Mike Macdonald wants Tyrese Knight to show people that he's ready to play earlier than anticipated. Based on the discussions that I've had, there's a reason they picked him in the 4th round when a lot of people were thinking later in the draft. Mike Macdonald has been enamored by this kid throughout the pre-draft process. The fact he can play both linebacker positions, yes, he's unpolished. Yeah, there's a lot to work on. And yet what I'm hearing, very positive reviews here early on, how quickly he's already latching on to stuff, that he's a sponge is what I heard. So I'm curious, is Tyrese Knight going to be that rookie on day 3 that comes in and says, hey, I'm like Rick Woolen, I'm ready to play, and you just didn't think I was? And so I'm fascinated to see that linebacker position that's brand new and change as much as any position group for the Seahawks.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth, Corbin. I mean, I've literally been texting with former Seahawks Pro Bowl linebacker Lofa Tatupu and just kind of asking his thoughts on Tyrese Knight and the rest of the rookie linebacker class leading up to the draft here. And Tyrese Knight was somebody that Lofa, and he's not here to kind of defend himself, so I'll just kind of use his comments here. But he identified early on as, in his words, quote unquote, a dog and a guy that he just loved the toughness in which that Tyrese Knight played. So I do think that is one of the fascinating storylines is Tyrese Knight, especially considering the fact that he played predominantly on the outside at UTEP before he moved inside to linebacker and just absolutely put up incredible statistics this past season. Is he able to show Mike Macdonald that he is ready to play? I still believe that the starters on opening day is going to be, as you mentioned, Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dodson. But still, Tyrese Knight to me is the absolute wild card, similar to how I mentioned Draymond Jones just a moment ago as the very first guy that popped off my head. Tyrese Knight, the linebacker position, is that guy as well.
And going to the secondary, this is much like the defensive line in the sense we know the pieces are already there. You've got Devin Witherspoon. You've got Rick Woolen. You added Nehemiah Pritchett. You brought in DJ James. Kobe Bryant's back. You're trying to figure out where he fits into the equation. Julian Love, Rayshawn Jenkins, Kayvon Wallace, all those players. How are they going to mix and match these guys? I'm just curious to see who's getting those first team reps. And here's the disclaimer, Rob. It's OTAs. There is not a depth chart. There's not even an unofficial one. Now, coaches might have one in their brain, and they're already starting to think this is where this guy stacks up. But this time of year, you want to get the reps. You want to see what you got, especially with a new coaching staff. And so I'm curious to see which groupings personnel-wise are used the most during this time period over the next 10 practices leading into mandatory minicamp, and particularly in the slot, how they use Devin Witherspoon. Are they going to continue moving him around a bunch? Do we see him playing more outside? What do we see with the rookies? Where do these new safeties fit in? There are a lot of moving parts, new defense. And so I think just keeping an eye on how that personnel is utilized is going to be worthwhile here.
No question about it. I think that just to try and put it as simply as possible, where's Devin Witherspoon? If he is at that nickel cornerback spot, then you have an incredible battle on the outside spot outside of Rick Woolen. If Devin Witherspoon is going to take over at that starting outside spot opposite Woolen, then who is going to be your nickel corner moving forward? And does that allow Seattle to use the 3 safety look that we talked about so much a year ago under Pete Carroll? But now we are actually seeing a head coach that, as defensive coordinator, at least in Baltimore, use the 3 safety system to incredible effectiveness. And of course, that's Mike McDonald in the Baltimore Ravens system. So you mentioned some of the names there. I'm really fascinated to see what happens with Kobe Bryant. But to me, similar to what we talked about before with Draymond Jones and Tyrese Knight, is that if you just designate where that Devin Witherspoon is going to line up, you basically can figure out everything else on its own. So I really am fascinated to see where Seattle lines up number 21, and if he is able to create as many plays, whether it be at the outside, the nickel positions, if he is able to create as many plays as he did as a rookie.
I always call this domino season, and it's definitely domino season when you've got brand new coaches, brand new assistants, a lot of new players, particularly on defense. You're trying to put everything together. There's going to be experimentation. And what happens with Witherspoon and some of the other established starters, there are going to be domino effects on the rest of the depth chart and who's going to play and who might be in jeopardy of making this roster come late August. So it's going to be really fascinating to watch. When we return for our final segment here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks, we've got 2 more undrafted rookie free agents that we're going to take a deep dive on as we take a look at Kansas center Mike Novitsky, as well as Wyoming linebacker Easton Gibbs. We'll get to that here in a moment. Don't go away. This episode of Locked On Seahawks is brought your way by Game Time. You shouldn't have to think about skipping a mortgage payment when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, making sure that Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Earlier this month, my wife and I were able to see the metal gods that are Judas Priest live in St. Louis. We had tickets in the lower bowl for under $75 a piece. Normally, the prices for such a concert would make you want to take a painkiller, but thanks to Game Time, even though it felt like we were breaking the law, if you think we weren't going to take advantage of such an awesome deal, you've got another thing coming. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price to write your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s that are tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make sure to switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you all the big stories without the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As OTAs get underway today, undrafted rookies are going to be part of the mix, trying to find their place with this football team on the 90-man roster, getting meshed with veterans, the other draft picks that they were even working with. This was the first practice on the field with helmets on where everybody was able to get together. You're going to see 10 of those leading up to the middle of June when they have mandatory minicamp, and then you have a long hiatus before the start of training camps. So this is a huge couple weeks coming up, not just for the veterans, but certainly for the undrafted rookies. Looking at two more undrafted players that were signed by the Seahawks here on today's show. We're going to start in the offensive line, and it's interesting. We already talked about Oluwatimi and Nick Harris likely going to be in a two-way battle at the center position. Former Kansas center Mike Novitsky, though, he might have something to say about that. And we've seen undrafted rookie centers have success in the past in Seattle. And this is a guy that has played a ton of football. In fact, he started 6 years at Buffalo and Kansas, where he transferred the last 3 years. We saw how good of an offense Kansas had last year. And Mike Novitsky was the anchor of that offensive line in the middle. You're muted.
No, he really was, Corbin. I'm surprised that Mike Novitsky wasn't drafted. And so you're talking about a guy who was 6'5", 309 pounds, 6'4.5". I apologize, but still, the point is that he has the size that every NFL team is prioritizing. And as you said, I mean, he started 6 seasons at college football. The first half of that was at the University of Buffalo, where he worked under Lance Leipold, who Leipold moved on to Kansas a couple of years ago, has become one of the biggest stories in all of Big 12 football with the success that he has had with the Kansas Jayhawks. And he was able to convince his starting center, Mike Novitsky, to move with him to the Jayhawks. And he had incredible success there. Was a all Big 12 player this past season, was a all MAC player the previous 2 years at the University of Buffalo. This is a two-time Remington Award winner. He gave up a handful of sacks over 6 seasons as a starter. He's not an elite athlete. He ran a 5.35 in the 40-yard dash. He had 23 repetitions with 32.5-inch arms. So solid power, but not elite power. He's a little bit more of a wall-off blocker than a guy who's going to truly push people off of the line. But I saw a number of snaps of this Kansas tape and previously at Buffalo as well, but focusing in on the higher level of competition in the Big 12, Corbin, where he was lined up at center and he was asked to be able to basically move and block essentially as the left tackle, because Kansas ran so many running plays. They allowed their quarterback to get out and move, and Novitsky was athletic enough to be able to block on the move. And to me, that is one of the most fascinating things about this. And that's why I had to kind of bite my tongue a moment ago when I mentioned before that Oluwatimi and, of course, Nick Harris are Seattle's primary starters, or at least competing to be the starting center. I wonder if there's not a 10% rep allocation here to Novitsky, because, again, he is a player that played at the college level, at the highest levels, 2 different systems, and has been very successful in doing so. He does have the mobility, the awareness that you're looking for as a run blocker as well as a pass protector. Mike Novitsky, I know that's not a name that's just going to roll off the tongue for a lot of people. Hell, I kept myself on mute here for a moment just to kind of start this segment, but I do think that he is among the offensive players in this class that really does have a chance to kind of surprise some people as an undrafted free agent, perhaps even pushing for making this roster outright. And certainly I believe that he could be a practice squad candidate.
Some may look at his stats last year. Pro Football Focus charged him with 4 sacks given up. He gave up 1 sack combined in the previous 3 seasons. Mm-hmm. And when you look at how much Kansas threw the football, particularly when Jason Bean took over as the quarterback in the second half of the season, they were slinging the ball over the place. That's the way the Big 12 plays football. It's wide open, air it out football. Even though Kansas is a very solid running team, Novitsky was asked to block a lot in pass protection for two quarterbacks that like to extend plays, and that made life difficult. But he's still at a 97.2% efficiency rate in pass protection. That's more than acceptable. And again, 3 years before last year, had one combined sack that he gave up. So you're talking about a guy that's played a ton of snaps. He's been durable for the most part. Doesn't test like a solid athlete, but when you watch on film, he had enough athleticism to do the things Kansas asked him to do. So I look at Novitsky as a guy, he's still a long shot to make this football team, but the center position's wide open. If he comes in and grasps the offense quickly, he impresses Scott Huff, hey, he's got no allegiance to the guys that were here before he arrived. Novitsky could be a player that's very much in the mix. I feel the same way about the defensive player we're going to be talking about today. And he's somebody that wasn't really on my radar until the last week when I've gotten my hands on some all-22 film for Wyoming, which has proven to be very difficult. But I was able to get a couple of games. And Easton Gibbs is that classic non-power 5 player that is undersized, isn't necessarily a great athlete, but all the guy does is make plays. Over 100 tackles last year and the year before that, 5 sacks in the last 2 years. So he can blitz, he can get after the quarterback a little bit. And there are some solid plays in coverage. You're not going to get a lot of the ball production from him, but Easton Gibbs has enough athleticism and savvy to be able to do that. And we just talked about how wide open linebacker is. If I'm somebody like John Radigan, I'm looking in the rearview mirror and like, where is the Gibbs kid at? Because this is a guy that just has that nose for a football, and he is incredibly tough, which you cannot understate how valuable that trait is at the linebacker position in particular. This is a kid that I'm getting much higher on, and in fact, I had him on my short list of players that might have a chance to make this football team.
Yeah, he's a really instinctive football player. This is a guy that played his high school ball in California, was a quarterback and a safety, and people had questions about how well he would be able to pack on some pounds and still be able to keep his speed. He wound up signing with Craig Bowl in Wyoming. Craig Bowl, of course, has produced a great number of NFL prospects at Wyoming, previously at North Dakota State. I mean, the last two inside linebackers who started with the Cowboys were Logan Wilson, who is now the starter with the Cincinnati Bengals, and Chad Muma, who was a backup but still was drafted by the Jacksonville Jaguars a couple of years ago. You mentioned the production here with Easton Gibbs, and in the last 2 seasons he was over 100 tackles. The third season 3 years ago he was a backup and still had 89 tackles, 12 passes broken up over those last 3 seasons. You mentioned the sacks. He's a slithery and very instinctive player. He's a guy that I'm intrigued by. I just have some reservations about his size and physicality in Seattle's system, at least what I'm expecting this system to be. He's 6 foot, 233 pounds. And Corbin, I talked about this before with offensive and defensive linemen, how we focus so much on arm length and wingspan, but also I think we need to be focusing on guys' hips and their lower bodies. And when I look at Easton Gibbs, I still see a former safety. Again, 6 foot, 233 pounds. It's a little bit lighter than you would like at the linebacker position. And I think it's especially light considering what I expect to be the expectations of Seattle's linebackers here. I see a guy who, again, locates the football very quickly, is a reliable open field tackler. He is more of a tackler than a thumper. He doesn't put people down the ground immediately the way that I see Tyrell Dodson, Tyrese Knight, and even Jerome Baker at times, John Radigan do at times. I think this is a fascinating storyline. The fact that he didn't play a lot of special teams at Wyoming is a little bit of a concern. Why I believe that he has a little bit of a upward push that he may have to make throughout these OTA and training camp process to actually push for making a roster spot or even a practice squad member, making him a practice squad member for this club. But I love the instincts. I love the toughness. I love the durability. And so I'm really fascinated with how Easton Gibbs is going to be able to fit with the Seahawks.
I think that he's a little less athletic version of Ben Burr-Kirven. That is what I see on film, the ability to find the football. There's some coverage skills. I think he's got the traits to play special teams. He did run a sub 7-second 3-cone, so his change of direction skills are elite, but only a 4.71 40. So he's not a guy that's going to run fast in a straight line, but his instincts make up for that. And he's obviously got the quickness to do it too. I just think he's a player to keep a close eye on as we go through OTAs and into training camp. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube, wherever else you listen in, to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to be joined by the great Thor Nystrom, and we're going to be diving into Seattle's dessert draft, the 8th round, whatever moniker you want to use, talking undrafted players. Always a fun episode when Thor joins the show. Make sure you're listening in. That'll start at 5 p.m. Pacific time, as always. Thanks for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your Monday. Go Hawks.